Although smartphone internals like the processor have been getting progressively faster and more powerful through the years, it's also rarer and rarer to come across truly innovative hardware designs. So today we're taking a look at one example of the latter. It's the Meizu Pro 7. This is a smartphone that actually came out several months ago, so it's no longer completely new to the market. But the benefit is the price has come down fairly significantly. This was at one point Meizu's flagship, and it sold for 400 euros or around $500 to $600 depending on where you looked. That was a little bit expensive considering it used a MediaTek chipset, although very fast, not quite as energy efficient as a Qualcomm counterpart. Now you can find it in this limited red edition, which is extremely striking, for under 300 on Gearbest, which I think is a pretty fair price to pay considering you are getting a very well-built, well-performing, and unique smartphone. So let's do a quick refresher of some of its hardware specs first. Obviously, the first thing that you see on the back is that unique secondary display, which can show you notifications, time, date, weather, as well as a pedometer, which allows you to track your steps. It can be turned on very easily just by flipping the phone over, and there's an always-on accelerometer that detects that motion and will turn on the display. Since it is AMOLED, it's very energy efficient. It's about 2 inches diagonally, and again, you can swipe very easily to access some of these quick shortcuts. When you have a new call or text message come in, there's also a notification icon that will populate on the bottom of this display. One other neat trick is I can swipe from the bottom to the top to access a selfie camera mode that uses the rear cameras as your selfie cams, and it promises to capture, of course, higher definition as well as supposedly smarter looking selfies than a front-facing camera can deliver. So photography is yet another point that Meizu has made market improvements, at least on paper, on the Pro 7. Otherwise, we have access to, again, a unibody finish, which is extremely beautiful. The phone originally came in 3 colors. It also came in a more traditional black as well as silver, and the integrated antenna bands also fit seamlessly into the phone's design. On the very bottom of the unit, we have access to a USB Type-C port, which is able to fully charge up the phone in under an hour and a half, so pretty impressive. It has a 3000 milliamp hour capacity battery, which is fairly typical in terms of size for a 5.2-inch smartphone. It will last you for about a day and a half to 2 days of regular use before you need to recharge it again. However, if you are using this phone very lightly, it has actually excellent standby battery. For example, I left it unused for about 4 to 5 days last week, and the battery only dropped 8 to 10% during that duration, which is pretty impressive compared to other devices. There's also a 3.5mm headphone jack, always nice to see, and also a mono speaker on the bottom. Meizu originally came out onto the scene as a manufacturer of MP3 players and hi-fi audio players, so you would think that audio is yet another point that they would want to make sure works well on their devices, and the Pro 7 tends to have pretty solid audio performance that we'll also dive into more closely in a moment. You can see that there's a heavy customization on top of Android that's performed by Meizu's Flyme OS. It's a very unique software skin that I'm actually a huge fan of when I was using it in the past few days, and one of the reasons why I recently switched over to the Pro 7 as my daily driver. I think that it's actually very elegant, and it has many features that you don't tend to see on other Android devices that actually make a lot of sense. Alright, so let's start from the lock screen here. The first thing that I'll talk about is the fingerprint scanner, which also serves as a physical button. First of all, the sensor is very fast and responsive. It unlocks the phone even when it's turned off completely relatively quickly. And when you are in a specific application, let's say we go into security, I can physically press down on the key to go all the way back into the home. I can also tap on settings, and let's say I get deeper into a menu interface. I don't have to press down all the way. I can just tap on it once and it will go back one page. We see just one earpiece that also tucks away the proximity as well as ambient light sensors. So by fitting everything into just this one sliver, it makes the overall design less cluttered and more elegant. So by now you're probably thinking, well, how do I open up multitasking or access advanced settings without the presence of additional hardware keys down below? Well, essentially you can rely on gestures completely on Flyme. So to access your list of all your open applications, all you have to do is swipe up from the bottom bezel of the screen in a way that's kind of reminiscent of Palm's Web OS, as well as on the iPhone X right now. You have the ability to then very quickly look at your past apps displayed and visualized in the metaphorical deck of cards. From here, I can toggle very quickly between different open applications, or I can close out of them completely by swiping all the way up. You can also drag up from anywhere on the main screen to access Meizu's custom universal search. This is a pretty unique feature that I can type on here to launch into specific apps that I have installed on my phone, or do a quick web search in general. Under accessibility options in the setting, you'll find a full list of additional gestures, such as double tap to wake, as well as slide up to access various different types of apps as shortcuts. So for instance, I can double tap anywhere on the screen now to wake it back up if you find that particularly helpful. Alright, so now taking a quick look at the camera. You can actually double tap on the home key to quickly launch into it, and it takes just 0.1 seconds to go into this interface. It actually is a pretty nicely designed interface, and one of the best attributes of the Meizu Pro 7 is that the camera is very quick to capture a shot. So there aren't any problems such as shutter delay or lag as you're capturing multiple images. There's also a key that you can tap on once to turn on the display on the back, again for capturing selfies, and on the side I can change between things such as a bokeh mode, which it actually works pretty well. Taking a look at some sample images. Now, one thing I'm not a huge fan of is that Meizu has included a water print on the bottom here that says Meizu Pro 7 dual camera, and it's kind of hard to remove this from your photos. Regardless, you can see that the overall images do have a pretty good quality to them in terms of accuracy of color and working well across various lighting environments, both indoors and outdoors. One limitation though is at 12 megapixels with the rear-facing cameras, it doesn't have as much detail for you to zoom all the way in. So if you do a lot of cropping and you expect the sharpest details when you zoom in, let's say by 500 times or 200 times, that's an area where the camera will struggle a little bit more in. But if you just look at your images from afar, it's perfectly acceptable. So here are a few additional photos, again showing off its capabilities in various lighting environments from sunny to cloudy and overcast. As a whole, the quick shutter speed, even in the HDR mode, is definitely a big advantage for capturing moments on the fly. However, in realistic day-to-day testing, I slightly prefer the smartest Nut Pro 2's camera. Now the Nut Pro 2 is another smartphone that's priced in the same range. It's slightly more expensive, has a Snapdragon 660, and also has dual cameras on the back rated at 12 megapixels. So on paper, the camera sensors are very similar. But on Smartisons, I got a little bit more detail and a bit more of a vibrant pop in terms of contrast. So if I zoomed all the way in, pictures there just seemed slightly more sharp. I am nitpicking here since you can tell even in darker, almost nighttime environments, it still does incredibly well. But it's definitely not the best camera that I've seen of late in this category, although it is certainly solid. Alright, so next let's take a quick look at some of the other applications installed on the phone. With such a heavy layer of customization, you of course get plenty of apps redesigned by Meizu from the ground up, and they have a very consistent looking UI that's colorful, reminds me a little bit of a mashup between Oppo's Color OS and maybe something inspired by iOS to a certain extent. But most of the apps are very beautiful as well as clean in terms of the UI UX experience, and you have plenty of different settings that you can play around with. We also have our full list of Google apps installed on this limited red edition handset, including access to the Chrome, YouTube, Maps, Drive, as well as the Play Store for downloading all the latest titles and games that you would possibly want to interact with. And under tools, you have additional things such as a voice recorder. There's also a toolbox, which is filled with some pretty unique tricks from Meizu. And there is a level tool that will tell you, how far off you are from being flat, in addition to a ruler, which is actually more handy than you'd expect. You can pull on it. It has a limited range because it's basically just how big this phone's display is, but you can measure smaller objects more precisely here and get a reading of what the length is. There's also a decibel tool that allows you to directly measure how loud your environment is. Takeaway is the speaker quality is decent, but not quite as strong again as the Smartison Nut Pro 2. Also is no match to more powerful speakers like on HTC's Boom Sound, but it gets fairly loud without distorting, and it does well in mids and highs, so for jamming some quick songs as well as for watching YouTube clips, it's more than suffices. So now we're taking a quick look at the web browsing performance. I'm trying to load up the full version of the New York Times using Chrome. This is always a nice benchmark because this is a very complex website filled with ads as well as scrolling elements and videos embedded, which could be very difficult for lower powered handsets. Luckily, the Meizu Pro 7 has plenty of horsepower thanks to the Helio P25. Even with multiple games and apps open in the background, it still runs very smoothly, as you can see here. Quality is also excellent. The mics are noise cancelling, so even in challenging outdoor environments, it picked up our voices without any problems. This is a 4G LTE device in certain countries, and it supports both AT&T and T-Mobile here in the States without too many problems. I consistently received about 3 bars of reception here in the Seattle region. Gaming and graphics are also quite impressive, as expected from a flagship level device. You can run any of the latest games and titles from the Play Store without any problems, even graphically intensive ones, and it all works again without too much lag or delay. So for instance, right now, let's see if we want to build a tower in this tower defense game and let the game begin. So again, impressive graphics, even if we try and pan around, zoom in, everything again remaining very good in terms of frame rates as well as the overall experience. So that's more or less it as far as the Meizu Pro 7 is concerned. Again, this is my daily driver, not necessarily because it has, let's say, the best camera or has, the best processor in the world, but rather it's extremely well-rounded and presents an overall package that's difficult to rival at this price point, especially taking a look at some of its competitors and less-known Chinese OEMs. Meizu does have a much more credible backing, and in my opinion, they're very similar to Xiaomi, Huawei as far as build and reputation, so they do truly care and have an insane amount of detail when it comes to their premium phones. So if you are interested in picking up a phone that, again, breaks away from the norm both in terms of design as well as having very consistent performance for a Chinese OEM, then you can definitely check out more details about the Meizu Pro 7. Thanks for watching this video review here at OS Reviews.